Imagine planning your sister's dream wedding, only to find out she's kissing your boyfriend a week before the big day. Yeah, that happened. And trust me, this story gets crazier than you'd expect. Stick around because what I uncovered after that will blow your mind.
I caught my sister kissing my boyfriend days before her wedding. I was 28 and found myself in a very uncomfortable situation with my 26-year-old sister and my 29-year-old boyfriend. As her wedding got closer, I started to notice something strange about how she behaved around him. At first, it was just little things, small gestures that didn't feel right, but they left me feeling more and more uneasy. It started with what seemed like harmless comments. My sister would often say things like, "Wow, you're so funny," to my boyfriend, even when his jokes weren't particularly amusing. She laughed a little too hard at everything he said, almost as if she was trying to impress him. At first, I brushed it off, assuming she was just being extra friendly because of the excitement leading up to her wedding. But as the days went by, her behavior started to feel less innocent and more concerning. She started finding subtle excuses to touch him, placing a hand on his arm during conversations, or brushing past him a little too closely. These gestures were small, almost innocent, but they carried an undertone. I also caught her staring at him when she thought no one was looking, her gaze lingering just a bit too long. Each moment sent a wave of unease through me, making it harder to ignore. One evening, after a family dinner where her flirtatious behavior had been impossible to miss, I finally decided to confront my boyfriend. As soon as we got home, I turned to him and asked, "Did you notice how Sarah was acting tonight?" He frowned in confusion and replied, "What do you mean?" I carefully laid it all out. The excessive laughter, the unnecessary touches, the way she kept looking at him like no one else was in the room. He listened patiently, but after a moment, shrugged and said, "I think you're overthinking it. She's probably just excited about the wedding. It's nothing." His words were meant to reassure me, but they didn't. Deep down, I knew what I was seeing wasn't harmless. Something felt off, and the more I tried to convince myself it was all in my head, the more the tension built. Determined to get to the bottom of it, I started paying closer attention. Over the next few weeks, my suspicions only grew stronger. Around my sister, everything felt heightened. She always seemed to find ways to be near my boyfriend, choosing the seat closest to him, creating excuses for him to help her with wedding tasks, even when I was right there. It was subtle, but it was constant, and it was impossible to ignore. Every interaction felt like a calculated move, and it left me questioning just how far this would go. One afternoon, during a family barbecue at my parents' house, something happened that I couldn't ignore. I had gone inside for a moment to use the bathroom, and when I came back, I froze. In the corner of the yard, my sister and my boyfriend were standing far too close, speaking in hushed tones. She giggled at something he said, her laughter sending a wave of discomfort through me. The moment they noticed me, they stepped apart abruptly. My sister quickly walked off, acting as if nothing had happened, but I felt a knot of nausea and anger tightening in my chest. Still, I bit my tongue. I didn't want to create a scene in front of everyone. That night, once we were home and alone, I brought it up. I tried to keep my voice steady as I asked, "What were you and my sister talking about earlier?" He looked at me, clearly caught off guard, and replied, "Just wedding stuff. She was asking about the music playlist." His explanation felt too casual, too convenient. I couldn't shake the image of how close they'd been, or how quickly they'd moved apart when I appeared. I pressed further, asking why such a simple topic required them to stand so intimately. He sighed, frustrated, and dismissed my concerns. "You're reading too much into it," he said. "She's your sister. She's just being friendly, that's all." But I couldn't hold back any longer. The frustration that had been building for weeks spilled out. "She's not just being friendly," I said, my voice shaking with emotion. "She's throwing herself at you, and you're letting it happen." His face fell, hurt by my accusation. "What do you expect me to do?" he asked, his voice quiet but firm. "She's your sister. I can't just tell her to stop being friendly without making things awkward for everyone." I argued that he could at least set clear boundaries, letting her know he wasn't interested in anything beyond a platonic relationship. but he shook his head, insisting that I was overreacting. "I'm not interested in her at all," he said, his tone exasperated. "There's nothing to clarify because there's nothing happening. You're making this into something it's not." His refusal to see my side only deepened the tension between us. I wanted to believe him, I truly did, but the unease in my gut wouldn't go away. Our conversation spiraled into a frustrating loop, neither of us budging from our perspective. He insisted I was imagining things, while I felt like I was screaming into the void, unable to make him see what seemed so obvious to me. After what felt like an endless back and forth, we gave up, retreating to bed with nothing resolved. The tension hung heavy between us, leaving me angry, frustrated, and wide awake for most of the night. By the next morning, I knew I couldn't avoid it anymore. If I wanted answers, I'd have to confront my sister directly. Avoiding her was only making the situation worse. Summoning my courage, I called her and asked if she could meet me for coffee. Her cheerful tone on the phone only fueled my anxiety. She seemed completely unaware of the storm brewing on my end. We agreed to meet at a small cafe near her apartment. When we sat down, my nerves were impossible to hide. My hands trembled slightly as I stirred my coffee, while my sister, oblivious to my unease, chattered away about wedding details. She was radiant, her excitement spilling out in every word, which only made the task ahead of me harder. I let her talk for a few minutes, trying to steady myself, but I could feel the words bubbling to the surface. Finally, I couldn't hold it in anymore. Cutting her off mid-sentence, I said, "We need to talk about something serious." The shift in my tone startled her. She froze, her cheerful expression replaced by concern. "What's wrong?" she asked, her voice tentative. Taking a deep breath, I told her everything. I explained how I had noticed her behavior around Tom, how she laughed too much at his jokes, touched him unnecessarily, and looked at him in a way that made me deeply uncomfortable. I laid it all out, careful not to accuse but firm enough to make my point. "It needs to stop," I said, my voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotions inside me. Her reaction was almost theatrical. First, she looked shocked, then confused, and finally defensive. "What are you even talking about?" she demanded, her voice rising. She denied everything, calling my concerns ridiculous. But I didn't back down. I calmly but firmly repeated what I'd observed, explaining that even if she didn't realize it, her actions were inappropriate and hurtful to me. Her response was a sharp laugh, dry and dismissive. "Tom is practically family," she said, waving her hand as if swatting away my concerns. "I'm just being friendly. You're overreacting." But her words didn't ease the tension. If anything, they made it worse. I could see the walls going up between us, her unwillingness to acknowledge the issue creating a rift I wasn't sure we could bridge. It was clear this conversation had struck a nerve, but instead of bringing us closer to a resolution, it only left us further apart. The unease I felt leaving the cafe was even stronger than when I had walked in. This wasn't going to be an easy fix, and deep down, I knew the worst was yet to come. I couldn't hold it in any longer. The words spilled out as I voiced my frustrations, laying everything on the table. I told her it wasn't just friendliness. She was constantly finding excuses to be near my boyfriend, touching him unnecessarily and laughing at every single one of his jokes, even the ones that weren't remotely funny. It was impossible to ignore, and it was making me increasingly uncomfortable. As I spoke, I watched her face shift, first to shock, then to anger. Her cheeks flushed red as my words hit her, and I could tell she wasn't expecting such accusations, especially so close to her wedding. Her response was sharp, like a dagger aimed straight at me. "Wow, so this is what you think of me," she snapped, her tone dripping with disbelief. "Maybe you should take a long look at yourself. Sounds like you're the one with insecurities, not me." Her words stung more than I cared to admit, but I forced myself to stand my ground. I took a deep breath and tried to clarify. "This isn't about insecurity. It's about boundaries and respect. You've been crossing a line, and it needs to stop." My voice was steady, but inside my emotions were boiling over. That's when she snapped. She pushed her chair back with a loud screech, standing abruptly, her body language making it clear the conversation was over. "I'm not going to sit here and listen to this nonsense," she declared. Her voice was sharp, and her words cut deep. "If you can't trust your own sister, that's your problem, not mine." With that, she grabbed her things and stormed out of the cafe, leaving me sitting there alone, reeling from the exchange. I stared blankly at my coffee, a swirl of emotions rushing through me: anger, sadness, doubt. Had I overreacted? Was I letting paranoia get the best of me? The confidence I had walked in with was now slipping away, replaced by a gnawing sense of uncertainty. When I got home, my boyfriend immediately noticed something was off. His concerned expression made it clear he knew I wasn't okay. "What happened?" he asked gently. I sat down and recounted everything: the conversation with my sister, her dismissive attitude, and how it all fell apart. As I spoke, I saw the worry deepen on his face. When I finished, he let out a long sigh and said something I wasn't expecting. "I think you might have made a big mistake." His words hit me like a slap. He explained that Sarah was probably hurt, especially with her wedding so close, and he worried I had only made things worse. Feeling defensive, I shot back, "Are you taking her side?" He shook his head. "No, I'm not taking sides," he said quickly, trying to calm me down. But then he hesitated and added, "I just don't think Sarah was flirting with me, and even if she was, which I honestly doubt, confronting her like that probably wasn't the best way to handle it." Hearing this left me more conflicted than ever. Tears began welling up in my eyes as I asked, "So what was I supposed to do? Just ignore it?" My voice cracked with frustration and hurt. He walked over, wrapping his arms around me in a soft embrace. "No," he said gently, "but maybe there was a better way. You could have talked to me more about it first or approached Sarah in a less confrontational way. Now, with how things went, she's likely upset with both of us. And with her wedding so close, this could make everything feel even more awkward for everyone." His words stung, not because they were cruel, but because they made me question everything. Overwhelmed, I pulled away from him and snapped, "So this is all my fault?" My voice was sharp, my emotions raw. He sighed deeply, running his hands through his hair. "I'm not saying it's all your fault," he replied carefully, "but I do think you let your emotions take over. Maybe you overreacted a little." That was it. Those words ignited another argument. We went back and forth, but it became painfully clear that we were on completely different pages. He didn't understand why I felt so strongly, and I couldn't see how he could downplay what had happened. The more we talked, the more frustrated we both became. Finally, with a heavy sigh, he said, "I'm going to bed," leaving me sitting alone with my thoughts. The silence of the room was deafening, and my mind raced with doubt and second-guessing. Had I overreacted? Was I really to blame for everything spiraling out of control? As much as I wanted to convince myself I had done the right thing, a growing sense of uncertainty kept creeping in, leaving me more lost than ever. The days that followed were suffocatingly tense. My sister completely cut off communication, leaving a painful void between us. My parents, clearly noticing Sarah's distress, called to demand an explanation. When I tried to tell them what had happened, it was obvious they thought I had overreacted. Their responses were measured but firm, and I could feel their disappointment through the phone. With the wedding day fast approaching, I was drowning in uncertainty. As a bridesmaid, I was supposed to play a key role in Sarah's big day. But now that role felt more like a looming obligation. I wasn't even sure if she still wanted me there. Meanwhile, my boyfriend Tom reassured me that I should go to the wedding, insisting it would show there were no hard feelings. But the mere thought of standing there, watching Sarah walk down the aisle, knowing how angry and hurt she was, churned my stomach. Every part of this situation felt like an impossible knot, and no matter how I tried, I couldn't figure out how to untangle it without causing even more damage. Desperate to fix things, I called Sarah multiple times, leaving voicemails apologizing and begging her to talk. She never responded. One afternoon, I even went to her apartment. When she opened the door and saw me standing there, she shut it without a word. That door slam echoed in my mind for days. My anxiety grew heavier as the wedding day crept closer, and with it came restless nights. One night, I had a vivid dream. I showed up at the wedding, dressed and ready to play my part, but the moment I walked in, everyone turned to stare at me. Their whispers grew louder, their pointing fingers sharper. I felt their judgment suffocating me until I woke up in a cold sweat, my hands shaking uncontrollably. Update: things only spiraled further out of control after my confrontation with Sarah. Apparently, she told our mother everything, framing it as a wild accusation on my part. My mom called, furious, her voice a mix of anger and disbelief. "How could you accuse your own sister of something so disgusting?" she yelled. Her words stung like daggers. I tried to explain my side, but she wouldn't hear it. Instead, she demanded I fix this immediately, urging me to apologize to Sarah. "Do you have any idea how much stress you're putting on her before her wedding?" Her scolding left me shaken. Now, not only was Sarah avoiding me, but my parents were upset with me too. The weight of their judgment was unbearable. Tom, in his usual calm but frustrating way, continued to insist that I was overreacting. "You're making this bigger than it needs to be," he said repeatedly, as if those words were a magic cure for my emotions. But instead of comforting me, they only deepened my frustration and sadness. I felt trapped in a nightmare with no way out, isolated from my family, doubted by my partner, and overwhelmed by a situation I no longer knew how to handle. I went to my parents' house, hoping to clear the air and mend the growing tension. But what I stumbled upon shattered any hope of reconciliation. Just a week before the wedding, I heard hushed voices coming from the garden. Curious, I followed the sound, only to freeze in my tracks at what I saw. There, partially hidden behind a large plant, were Sarah and Tom, wrapped in a passionate embrace. Her legs were around his waist, his hand under her shirt, and they were kissing like no one else existed in the world. They were so engrossed in each other that they didn't even notice me standing there. It felt like the air had been sucked out of my lungs. My chest tightened, and for a moment I couldn't move, couldn't speak, as the reality of what I was seeing sunk in. A mix of rage and heartbreak surged through me like a tidal wave, and before I knew it, I was screaming. "What the hell is this?" My voice was raw, trembling with the weight of my fury and pain. The reaction was immediate. They broke apart, their faces contorted in shock and guilt. Sarah turned ghostly pale, her mouth opening and closing as if she couldn't find the words. Tom's face flushed and he stumbled over his words, stammering, "It's not what it looks like." But it was exactly what it looked like. The scene in front of me confirmed every fear, every suspicion that had been eating away at me for weeks. Tears spilled down my face as I choked out, "How could you? My own sister and my boyfriend." My voice cracked with the raw pain I could barely contain. Sarah, too, started crying, her voice shaking as she stammered an apology. "I'm so sorry," she sobbed, desperate to explain. "We didn't mean for this to happen." But her excuses only deepened the wound. The betrayal was too much, too overwhelming to process. I couldn't bear to hear another word. Without saying anything else, I turned and ran, my vision blurred by tears. I could hear their voices calling after me, begging me to come back, but I didn't stop. I didn't look back. I jumped into my car, my hands trembling as I gripped the wheel, and drove away. My mind was spinning, replaying the scene over and over again like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. The pain, the disbelief, the sheer devastation, it was all consuming, and for the first time I realized I might never forgive either of them. As I sped away, my phone wouldn't stop ringing. First it was Tom, then Sarah, and finally my mom. Each call only deepened the ache in my chest, but I couldn't bring myself to answer. The pain was still raw, and the thought of hearing their voices was unbearable. By the time I reached home, I felt completely drained, both emotionally and physically. I moved on autopilot, grabbing a bag and stuffing it with clothes and a few essentials. Staying here, surrounded by reminders of everything that had just shattered, was out of the question. Before I left, I sent Tom one final text, "We're done. Don't contact me again." I didn't wait for a response. I turned off my phone, silencing the chaos, and walked out the door. Now I'm sitting in a hotel room in a nearby city, staring at the ceiling and trying to figure out where to go from here. With the wedding only days away, I know one thing for certain: I can't attend. My relationship is over, and the bond I once cherished with my sister feels irreparably broken. It's like my entire world has been flipped upside down, and I don't know how to put the pieces back together. The worst part is realizing everyone made me feel like I was imagining things, that I was crazy for suspecting something was wrong. But I wasn't. I was right all along. That validation, instead of bringing relief, cuts even deeper. How do I move forward? How do I ever trust again? So Reddit, I'm turning to you. Any advice on how to pick up the pieces would mean the world right now. Update. The days after catching Sarah and Tom together were a blur of confusion and heartache. I spent most of my time in a fog, replaying the moment in my mind, trying to understand how things could have gone so wrong. My phone was relentless, buzzing with messages and missed calls from Tom, Sarah, and my parents. I ignored them all. Every ding felt like a weight pressing harder on my chest. But as the days passed, one thing became increasingly clear. There was someone else who needed to know the truth. Mark, Sarah's fiancé. I wrestled with the decision, knowing the pain it would cause, but I couldn't stay silent. He deserved to know the person he was about to marry and the betrayal she had been hiding. With a heavy heart and trembling hands, I dialed his number. The line rang once, twice, and then he picked up, his voice cheerful and unsuspecting. My stomach twisted as I realized how much I was about to destroy. "Mark," I began, my voice shaking, "there's something I need to tell you." When Mark answered, his confusion was evident. "What's going on?" he asked, his tone cautious but concerned. I started by telling him about Sarah's recent behavior, how she had been in distress, claiming I had vanished and refused to speak to anyone. Then, taking a deep, steadying breath, I laid everything out for him. I recounted my initial suspicions, how everyone, including Tom and Sarah, had dismissed my concerns, and finally, the moment in my parents' garden that had shattered my world. Mark stayed silent as I spoke, only occasionally letting out a faint sound to show he was still listening. His lack of interruption made me even more anxious, the weight of the story pressing down on both of us. When I finally finished, the silence on the other end of the line was deafening. I could hear him breathing, as though he were trying to piece together everything he had just heard. Then, in a calm but deliberate voice, he thanked me for telling him. "I need some time to process this," he said, and with that, the call ended. I sat there, staring at my phone, wondering what Mark would do with the truth I had just handed him. The days leading up to the wedding passed in a blur, and I heard nothing more from him or anyone else in my family. Sarah stopped trying to contact me, and a growing dread crept over me. I couldn't shake the feeling that she had somehow managed to smooth things over with Mark, convincing him to forgive her. The idea that she could still have her perfect wedding, as though nothing had happened while my life lay in ruins, made me physically ill. I knew I couldn't attend. Watching her walk down the aisle, pretending everything was fine, was unthinkable. Instead, I decided to spend the day alone, trying to figure out how to rebuild my life after such a profound betrayal. That evening, as I sat in my small, quiet apartment, I received an unexpected call from my cousin Emma. Her voice was hushed, but there was an undeniable excitement and urgency in her tone. "Oh my God, you won't believe what just happened," she whispered. Confused and intrigued, I asked, "What do you mean? What happened?" Without hesitation, Emma launched into her story, her words spilling out like she couldn't get them out fast enough. She explained that everything had seemed normal at first. Sarah had looked breathtaking in her wedding dress, glowing as she walked down the aisle. Mark stood at the altar, waiting for her, composed and ready for the ceremony to begin. But then, just as it was time for the vows, Mark stepped forward, holding up a hand to pause the ceremony. "I have something to say," he announced, his voice steady but commanding. My heart raced as Emma recounted the scene, her excitement palpable. Whatever had happened next, I knew it was going to change everything. Mark, standing before everyone, announced that he couldn't go through with the wedding. His voice was steady but resolute as he told the guests that he couldn't marry someone who had betrayed her own sister and destroyed her life by getting involved with her boyfriend. The room fell silent, all eyes on him as he delivered the shocking revelation. Emma recounted how Sarah turned ghostly pale, her expression frozen in disbelief. The weight of Mark's words seemed to knock the air out of the church. Then, as if the situation couldn't get any more surreal, Mark turned to my parents and apologized. He told them they deserved to know the real reason I had distanced myself from the family. The tension in the room was palpable. Emma described how Sarah broke down into uncontrollable sobs while my parents stood there, stunned and confused, unable to process what they had just heard. The whispers among the guests grew louder, a ripple of shock spreading through the crowd as they tried to piece together what was happening. Finally, with a calmness that contrasted sharply with the chaos around him, Mark walked out of the church, leaving Sarah alone at the altar, crying inconsolably. "It was like something out of a movie," Emma said, her voice still tinged with disbelief. "Everyone's in shock. Your parents are trying to get the full story from Sarah, but she's an emotional wreck." As I listened, a whirlwind of emotions washed over me. On one hand, I felt a sense of vindication. Finally, the truth was out, and I wasn't the crazy, paranoid sister everyone had made me out to be. But on the other hand, the reality of the fallout hit hard. My family was in shambles, and the pain this had caused was undeniable. Sensing my silence, Emma asked softly, "Are you okay?" "I don't know," I admitted honestly. "I never wanted things to end like this." After a few more minutes of talking with Emma, I hung up and sat in silence, trying to process everything. The truth had finally come to light, but at what cost? My relationship with Tom was over. My bond with Sarah felt irreparably broken. And now, my entire family was caught in the crossfire of this betrayal. As I sat there, I realized that while the truth being out was a relief, it didn't magically fix everything. The road to healing and rebuilding trust would be long and uncertain. But for the first time in weeks, I felt a small glimmer of hope. The weight of silent truths no longer held me down. I could finally start moving forward, free from the burden of pretending everything was okay. As for what comes next, I honestly don't know. At some point, I know I'll have to face my family and navigate the mess this has left behind. But for now, I'm taking things one day at a time. If nothing else, this experience has taught me the importance of trusting my instincts and standing up for myself, even when others doubt me. To everyone who supported me through this journey, thank you. Your words of encouragement have meant more to me than I can ever express. And to anyone facing similar circumstances, remember this: trust your gut. Don't let anyone gaslight you into questioning your own reality. Your feelings and perceptions are valid. Never forget that.
Sometimes, life forces us to confront truths we'd rather avoid, testing our resilience and self-worth. In moments of betrayal and heartbreak, we learn the importance of trusting our instincts and standing firm, even when it feels like the world is against us. Healing takes time, but every step forward is a step toward reclaiming your peace and strength. If this reflection resonated with you, please give this video a like, leave a comment with your thoughts, and don't forget to subscribe. Your support means everything and helps us continue sharing meaningful reflections. Thank you for being here.